Mr. Chair, I'd now like to introduce Phil WARBRICK, and Phil is the Executive Chairman and Founder of the Synergine Group, a Fellow of the Institute of Professional Engineers and Chair of the Industry Advisory Board of the Civil and Environmental Engineering Department at Auckland University. He's been involved in many projects in infrastructure across New Zealand over the last 25 years and represented New Zealand on numerous delegations. An interesting fact about Phil is he used to be a manager of the All Whites, the New Zealand national men's football team. Thank you, Phil.
Good afternoon, distinguished guests, good friends, colleagues, it's great to be here. What I'd just like to discuss today is infrastructure, but perhaps infrastructure in a wider context. I guess that as we look at infrastructure in the world, we have to really start centring around cities. Cities are the way that infrastructure kind of starts to express itself. Certainly there's the regional economy, but what we have right now, 50% of the world is urbanised, but by 2050, we'll see 75% of the world urbanised, and particularly up in the area where the Belt and Road kind of focus is going to be. There's going to be huge population growth. We see about 7 billion people on the planet now. By 2050, we'll be touching 10 billion. This is the biggest growth phase in world history. It's just an immense time, and this initiative is very, very timely. I can just say that, and congratulations to the organising committee on what you've done so far. Imagine, we had 3 weeks to do this. Imagine, give us a few years what can be done. And it's, I think the spirit of what's happening here is wonderful. But just looking to the next slide, if we look at cities, there we talk about 3 areas. Obviously, we've been talking about sustainability today, but also livability and resilience. Resilience is particularly relevant, obviously, for us in New Zealand. We've had some fairly dynamic times of late with the earthquakes both in Christchurch and Kaikoura. That's affected us. But I think with the spirit of New Zealand and the strength that we do have as a nation, we've been able to overcome that. But I think we're going to see more of, just resilience needed in cities around the world. In city research, we do look at 3 areas. We talk about cities which are quite strong, and what we see in New Zealand, what we see in China. But there's many cities that are not in that place. There's many cities that are in conflict or post-conflict environments, or we see cities that are caught in between. And I guess we need to focus on how we strengthen those cities. And I think as our two nations work together, that is an important focus. And I think I just take my hat off, as we start to look in a more broader fashion. I think New Zealand, we carry some interesting dynamics, and I think coupled with the sheer world leadership of China, that is a powerful partnership, and we need more partnerships, and we need to strengthen cities which are indeed under duress. Next slide, please. So in cities now, we see a lot of research going on. There's many different things. United Nations Habitat Program, and I'm part of a working group at the UN going up there in February at UN Habitat, and we're looking at the dimensionality of better data that's starting to come through that we can process, and how we look to strengthen cities and the dimensionality of that. And we start to see a hierarchy moving beyond the traditional triple bottom line into cultural areas, into other dimensionality socially. And that's been mentioned in this conference. We are, it was wonderfully put by my wonderful new friend from Egypt, the Prime Minister, saying today about world harmony. That is exactly right. That is what we're kind of seeing. And if we are designing cities, we need to think about how different types of infrastructure can address the social dimensionality. And that's really quite important as we look at Indigenous cultures. We have our own wonderful, expression here, and it's enriched, the way that we do things in ever-increasing ways, and that's been spoken about today. And I think we're all committed to that. And I think that the Indigenous movement around the world is a very important one as we look at cities and the social cohesion. So I'll move to the next slide there. So this kind of trend, as you can see, is going deeper. So it kind of comes down to some basic things. Obviously, we get the roads right. We look at environmentally, we're looking there. But social and cultural things are more subtle, and they're more nuanced. And we need to think about those things, how we outwork them. And we need to start to think about how we can learn from one another. You know, in any good partnership, it's understanding, having that culture of honour and respect, where we can start to see what is important to one another, what we can learn from one another. As we look at the past, that's been invoked today as well. As we stand on the shoulders of our ancestors and we look forward. The other dimensionality is we look to our future, we look to our children. That is a very key focus, I think, in today's world. You know, that we look after our children, we build legacy projects, and that represents itself in the infrastructure that we build and also the social cohesion that we're looking to demonstrate. So, looking at some of the metadata that we can gather now, that's the Smart Cities framework is certainly something we'll see there, and technology is really important. I'm involved in a research group at Auckland University, helped to sponsor that, the Centre of Infrastructure Research, and we're looking to see, you know, data from around the world. And I think the Belt and Road Initiative can be a fantastic repository of data and how we can look at that and learn from different dimensionalities as we go across different cities and different nations and strengthen those together. I think the other part of the framework is we need to look at catalyst projects. It's looking at the big picture, it's understanding, having a strategy, but we need to translate that into things which we can actually do and projects we can do. And I'm going to be really interested to see as we begin, you know, at this conference, you know, we talked about that at lunchtime, how we can go into the future and start to see, you know, the measurement and the narrative of projects we can do together. And there's certainly when we take, you know, the different areas of expertise, of capital, of different dimensions, and build things. So that's why I think, you know, just like to encourage us all as we build those partnerships in that and look at those things in a broader sense. Now, in my last few moments, I'd just like to talk about that. I've had the privilege through working through football, as been mentioned, and that's a wonderful social cohesion that can come through sport. And football is a global game, and it's something that's close to my heart. So I was involved in a New Zealand team when we went to the World Cup in South Africa. And when we started, I think we were 139th in the world or something. We were very, you know, much in a struggling position. But over 5 years, we built to a place where we qualified for the World Cup. And when we got there, we only, you know, kind of played 3 games. And we didn't lose, actually, the only undefeated team. We didn't quite qualify out of the group, but we did gain credibility, and I think we played Italy and drew against Italy, the current world champions, and it was the 9th biggest upset in World Cup history. So you can do things, you know, if you have the right framework. So looking at this example here, our national captain, who's one of our magnificent Maori leaders, Winston Reid, he's a gentleman who certainly has a heart for New Zealand and for football. So we started off looking at a football academy, and he has a heart for at-risk youth as well, so we've been looking at that focus. But through the association with Belt and Road, I've met up with Kingsley, who's one of the organisers, and we've started a conversation. And that conversation has grown quite quickly. When Winston was here just playing in the World Cup qualifiers with Peru, we had a meeting with Kingsley. He immediately went back to China, connected with one of the senior sports schools over there, and we had already had a Skype meeting, and we're looking at doing something together. We were going to bring Chinese young players here to New Zealand with the objective of trying to gain pathways up into Europe. What I found out in the football context of if you get players in those senior leagues, in those top leagues in Europe, your national team rises up. So we wanted to kind of work together and see if we can do that. That's a combination. It's a social framework, it's using sport, but in my broader definition, that is infrastructure. That is something that's doing there. So there we go. So we're doing this initiative. We're starting now. We've been working with the Auckland City Council and Councillor Desley Simpson, who's going to be speaking to you tonight, has done a wonderful work in releasing a site for us there. And we're just on the cusp of starting to build the infrastructure and start to see people coming both domestically and internationally, particularly from China, and working together on that project. So hopefully next year when we have the summit, I'll report back on you with you, and we'll have players there, and let's see how far they can go. Because as your wonderful president from China has said, let's get a World Cup in China and let's see if we can win one. So that's my little goal, okay, in terms of infrastructure, see if we can do that together. So thanks for this opportunity, and I'll report back as I say from you. And look, I'm just thanks again to the organisers, because it's just a wonderful thing that we're doing here, and away we go. Thank you.